Hello, peoples of the internet. Today I have week 24 of the Stairway Mountain time trial series where I'm driving an Ibishu Dove. This particular model is the 600L JDM pickup. You'll see here, it's not the best vehicle, it will shake about a bit over bumps and things, but naturally it's a tiny four-wheel drive pickup truck and it feels exactly like that, a Mini D series. Now this model has 30 horsepower, although I was only able to hit 28 on a flat surface, absolutely flooring it. And it has 41 Newton meters of torque, the only two-figure torque figure here. You see I get a big slide on there. It has got very stiff rear leaf springs. That's inevitable. If you want a decent payload, you have to have stupidly firm leaves. It's just the way they do things. Unless you have really fancy air suspension, that might work. You'll see it here, it will get sliding, but it's exceptionally solid. I mean, these things are far more solid than they have any right to be, the same as the Pigeon that it's based upon. The differences mainly are the interior, the nose is a lot squarer, and yeah, I had a bit of a slide there. And naturally you have four wheels. Now this was the best one I could get out of it. It's really just care that you have to take. If you're not careful, you can easily get the rear to overtake the front, but as long as you're careful, as long as you respect it's a slidey beast, it can get around the corners at surprising speeds. Although having said that, it's not actually that quick. I mean, I felt about 30 seconds quicker than the time this set, which is a 9-minute 5.32. It felt so much quicker, possibly because it's on edge all the time, possibly because it scares you and that feels like I'm going a lot faster than I am. Also, the fact that it's going downhill might help, but it's not quick. If you get this in a drag race, it'll be completely disgraceful. You see there, I'm sliding again though. It's not an easy vehicle to drive as such, but it's easy enough to not feel horrible. Now, the time I set puts it between the D-Series base EcoBoost, actually slightly below that, and a few seconds ahead of the Pigeon 600 Convertible. So, perhaps not much more impressive than a Pigeon, but remember, this is a pretty slow vehicle. You see there though, after throwing it over the end, what have I got? Slightly bent up fiberglass. It's incredibly rigid, this. Also, it has a ladder frame, surprising for such a tiny vehicle. But you know, I like it. The interior feels a lot nicer than the Pigeon, and that really completes the vehicle, makes it feel more like an actual car, less like, I don't know, an appliance. Now here, we have another interesting vehicle. A newly released one actually, as of the making of this video. It's the Bruckell Legran. The base model automatic here, since the auto was cheaper, as I normally use autos because they're cheaper, since it's more of a base model, I guess you could say. And the transmission is horrible. I have to get that out there right now. I actually like the car itself, but the transmission, it's a 3-speed transmission with stupidly long gears. The power, for example, on a flat surface, flooring it at 90 miles per hour, as fast as I could get it, it would only get 82 bhp out of the engine, whereas really it's capable of 92 bhp and 153 Newton meters of torque, which I was able to achieve with a transmission. Also, as you go around corners, it feels so sluggish when you kick into second gear and you just lose all of the momentum. As you might see here, I just try and floor it, and I'm probably got a bit lucky there in where I was in the weather range, but it's not the best. It's really just a 1980s American economy car, much like a Pessima the Americans built at the time. And I actually managed to get a slide out of it. It does feel like it's got a pretty good chassis underneath all of it. It does understeer, but a little less than the Covet. It's probably the best way I can describe it. And the suspension is balanced. It's slightly to the softer side of balance, but it's not really soft nor really stiff. It's somewhere in the middle of the two. Now, the time this set was actually okay. I mean, given how sluggish it felt with that really annoying second gear sapping all the power, it's set an 8-minute 30.53 time, which puts it between a CRX stock and a 200BX custom. Well, we're beating a 200BX, I mean, that has to say it's controllable, right, if you can beat a 200BX. We also beat a Pigeon 4-wheel drive V8 race, and we came just below a Crown Victoria. So for the type of vehicle and the era of vehicle, it's not too bad, introduced in 1984 might I mention. But I would believe this is capable of a lot more. You can get 200 horsepower from a supercharged V6, and that felt a lot better than this model, but that's something for another day. So this particular base model, it's nice, it's just a little slow, and probably needs some slightly firmer suspension to make the most of the track, or hill as we might call it here, mountain even, whichever. I like it though, and it'll be interesting to see how this perhaps evolves with mods. There's already been a V8 and a rear-wheel drive mod, so you can kind of turn it into a muscle car, and honestly I think it might be more natural with rear-wheel drive if you can get it set up properly. Still, that's about it that I've got for this vehicle. The interior is very 80s. I actually quite like it. It's similar to a second generation Golf, another vehicle we had down here. And I like how it's not trying too hard to be stiff. I never like a stiff car. I like cars that prioritise comfort, even if they're technically not as fast. They can often be a lot more fun and make up for it that way. And I had a bit of a wobble. Surprisingly enough, I didn't crack any of the front three windows, but I smashed all the rears. Don't know how that happened. The front window's tough, but the front axle can break incredibly easily. Yeah, I think it's just because it's an early car and it's not quite evolved yet. But we can move on. You see, typical 80s interior really. Most cars look like that. Now here we have a quite recognisable car actually. Only it's called the Ibishu Begin. That's because it's a 90s Pessima, only in a similar vein to the SOHC Start. It's an incredibly cheap, slower vehicle. Just for the fun of it, I've gone with the 1.5 single overhead cam engine, which I believe makes just over 70 horsepower. The engine broke before the video, so I couldn't test it properly, but you know, it's decently punchy. It beat the Legran, so that means something, right? And you'll see, it's maybe not the best car in the world, but you do get the wonderful setup of the Ibishu Pessima. Again, to a slightly firmer side, but it feels more sophisticated than the Legran. Going on to this, you can tell the way it takes bumps is a lot nicer in general. It just doesn't have speed. But having said that, it does feel a little better than the SOHC Start when I did that back in the day. You'll see we can actually push it to quite decent speeds here, and then the cheap rubbish tyres really begin to give up. But being front wheel drive, being a well set up car, you can just floor it a lot of the time and it will kind of stable itself enough for you to get around the corners. There's a good example there. And you'll see it's balanced as well. This never at one moment felt hugely understeery. It feels somewhere in the middle, probably slightly to the understeery side. But the balance between understeer and oversteer is actually pretty good overall. It's not like the Covet where it just screams in your face, I'm an understeery hot hatchback. This is much more gentle and I like that about it. You'll see here, it does have some problems, it's not perfect, but as far as base models go, you know, this makes a very good use of its power, considering it's not the most powerful car we've got today by any means. It still manages to beat the Legran. The Legran sounded interesting as well. This doesn't really have a sound. It's kind of a cheap Volkswagen alternative for those people who think about reliability a bit more than that. I don't know, probably used car buyers mainly. There you'll see I smashed it up a bit. It's not as indestructible as the Ibishu Dove, and it doesn't have the indestructible front windscreen of the Legran, but hey, it's something. It's set in 827.44, which puts it just below a Crown Victoria and just above the CRX. And again, just above the Legran, so they're very closely matched vehicles by very different means actually. And this car is a lot more scrappy, yes. The interior, I prefer the Legran, but it's just personal taste really. There's nothing particularly wrong with this interior. You know, just my taste in interiors, I guess. I like retro stuff more than I like modern stuff. And seats are pretty good here as well. Now here, we have a vehicle you may actually recognise from previous videos. Only it's not one of those particular variants of it. This is the Gavril Bandit 200. And you might be able to tell now, it's got leaves on the rear. It's not the most sophisticated cornering machine. It's okay round corners, there's been much worse cars, but the leaf swings do take away from the handling of the coil swings of the 400X variant of this. It's also a lot less powerful, 114 horsepower. We do however have 252 Newton meters of torque, so it's enough to push this thing along quite nicely despite being a heavier muscle car. Now, this is capable. You'll see it's bouncing around a lot and it will lose itself a little more easily than the Pessima, but the power allows it to be slightly quicker, and I mean slightly. It's less than a second quicker than the Ibishu Begin. This puts it just below the Crown Victoria. So, who would have thought it? Yes, but a Crown Victoria and a simple old American saloon car, essentially. I wouldn't really call it a muscle car. Very similar. You'll see it actually handles speed fairly well here, probably thanks to the suspension being pretty decent on it. Although again, the leaf springs, they never quite give it as good handling as the coil springs. As far as I can figure, coil springs just improve everything on an old muscle car like this. Leafs are just very firm and very agricultural, and feel less like suspension, more like a bit of wood that's being used as suspension. It's not quite like that, but you know, that's how it feels. Anyway, it's not powerful. It's not fast, it doesn't really get around corners that well. But you know, it's somewhat fun. Old muscle cars can be fun to throw around a lot of the time. Probably because they're just so not suited to this kind of vehicle. Or track. Yeah, Stairway Mountain isn't a vehicle. That, you know, when you throw it down here, it just feels so crazy. It does get sliding though, it's not understeery, so if you fear understeer, it's your kind of vehicle. I like the styling of it as well. The styling is very retro, classic kind of pony car look. You know, if you're into classic cars as well, it's good in that respect, but I think I actually prefer 80s design and the style of the Legran, hard as it might be to believe. Although this has a nicer interior, there's no doubt about that. Although it does lack certain complexity and technology of later cars. Now here, we have the Miramar. I was always interested to see just how a very basic version of a Miramar would do down Stairway Mountain, since we've had the quicker variants and it often felt like they could spin the wheels up. Now this model with the primitive leaf springs, as seen on the Gavril Bandit, is not the best handling car in the world, but then it's so much fun. The way you can just throw this into corners, it's scary yet fun at the same time. It feels like it might tip over, but who cares when you're just having this much fun bouncing it around the Stairway Mountain time trial course, which is actually Stairway Mountain. Anyway, you'll see here, it's resisting the dangers of the world quite well. Although with my aggressive driving style and this car appreciating my aggressive driving style, it's hard to be perfectly gentle and perfectly relaxed with this car, you know. The time it's set, however, again a few seconds faster than the Bandit and the Ibishu Begin. It's an 8:22.45, which puts it just between the Grand Marshal V8 limousine and the Terrible. That's a fairly impressive time for essentially an old economy car with slightly sporty credentials. Remember, this isn't a high performance sporty variant of it, but it's more basic, more of a car you would drive every day. Although I must say the wood has to be critiqued and certain elements of chrome, as I would think they would be removed if you were trying to just make the car incredibly cheap. Just my opinion on things. but it came very, very close to the terrible. Honestly, milliseconds it beat that vehicle by. But hey, the agile Japanese handling just about won it out, I think. You'll see here, it does tip onto its side a lot. It's a fear I'm going to tip it over. More a fear than anything, just because of the way you can see the vehicle bobbling about all over the place. You always think it's going to grip too much and just let itself fall over, but then the grip presumably just isn't there. You'll see also I smacked the rear end into the rocks. I tried to pressure the rear end more than the front, since leaf springs are incredibly tough, so they can cope with it, whereas the front springs can't generally. You'll see I lost the mirror at the end, surprisingly enough not earlier on the one. But here we have it. It's a very nice little vehicle here. Very nice retro car, even if it's not got the chrome bumpers and things that you would see on more expensive variants. I wouldn't mind driving this, although I wouldn't feel safe in it, that's for sure. The muscle cars have proven to crash quite well despite their age, although this wouldn't. Now here we move on to something more modern than our previous few vehicles. It is a ETK 2400i pre-facelift with the automatic transmission. I was just trying to keep it cheap, you know, for this particular car. And this is actually really nice. As you would expect, I've driven the higher end variants of the K series and the 800 as well as the I series, and they all drive quite well. Although I like the I series because of the visibility you get, because of the seating position. Newer ETKs, they just have massive pillars and you can never quite see out of them, and they all feel too intrusive. This is just a very natural kind of view of the road, and it means although you only have a few horsepower, 127 in this case, not all of it will be usable with that automatic transmission obviously, it can make good use of its power and its meager 184 Newton meters of torque, and it gets round corners better than you might expect. You'll see that's why it's coming so far up on this week's times. It's just got handling that you don't see from older vehicles. It is firm, that's a disadvantage, but the I-Series historically in this series has proven to have suspension that's perfectly set up for this kind of usage. Even if it's not the best on the road at absorbing bumps, even if it's not the best on a ultimate racetrack against Formula 1 cars or whatever, for this kind of environment the balance is just perfect. And the balance remains, you know, it's still an I-Series, the basic chassis is still the same as those ones that were setting 6:45 times and such like. Those that were setting early 7-minute times. It's all the same basis, it all hangs up on this chassis, so even though this is not powerful, it pulls itself around the corners nicely. You'll see the brakes, yeah, they're not 6:45 brakes, but does it really matter? It's not designed to be a high-end sports car as such, it's just designed to be a sporty road car, and for that the 8-minute 13.37 time is particularly impressive. We'll see. It comes below an ETK 800 base and above a crash cart, within a second of the ETK 800 base actually, which is no bad feat there, you know. For an old German car to compete with a new one proves just how capable these things can be. Proves how they can punch above their weight and, you know, really beat modern cars at their own game. And this is a base model, remember. Now, speaking of base models, we have yet another base model. The Grand Marshal V8 base. Sure, for this you get plastic bumpers as with the Miramar, but overall this is a solid performance car. The V8, sounding impressive by today's standards, makes 213 bhp and 315 Newton meters of torque. It was an inline 6, but it was more expensive, so I didn't bother with that. But this engine, it's powerful, it's torquey, and the tyres can't quite keep up. The tyres are some cheapo wheels and tyres that you might find on a Covet or something, probably a little wider than that, but they're not impressive, they're not sporty. with decent tyres, with decent brakes, with decent everything, it could actually set a decent time. More decent than it's set already, actually. I mean, I was able to keep this under control enough to set a very impressive time. It was a 7:52.297. Yep, it's under 8 minutes. But that's quicker than the Pigeon STIG and just slower than the 1987 Golf. So overall, not bad at all. Remember, the Golf was a GTI, so for an old 90s premium American car to push to these kinds of levels is not bad, and I struggled to get back on the tarmac there. You see, it does cope with these high-speed impacts well, but it is firmer than other muscle cars. Probably part of why it's able to set such a good time with fairly low power compared to other muscle cars. It's still quite soft, but it's definitely firmer than older cars. Older cars can roll and bounce a lot. This doesn't, but you know, it's not quite as stiff. Slightly softer than the ETK, I would say, that came before this, but it's still not a firm car, just not as soft as other cars have been set up. Probably not quite as much travel either, being a more modern car. Anyway, I overall like this. I would have just fit better tyres, honestly. It's a problem with a few cars we've seen come down Stairway Mountain. They have the chassis, they have the suspension, they even have the engine, but they just don't quite have the tyres they need to push to the best levels of performance. And it's held quite a few cars back. The Cadillac Series 49 race, for example, we saw had excellent tyres, and that car, above all its flaws, set a fairly decent time because of that alone. Whereas this doesn't, and I feel that's holding it back quite a bit over what it could be capable of. It could be a great grip car. You'll see here, fairly nice interior, although there's been nicer. And we're onto the ETK already. Another ETK this time, the KC4T Convertible. Again, a pretty powerful car by this week's standards. Amazingly less powerful and less torquey than the Grand Marshal, with 186 bhp and 293 newton meters. And it has the same problems as Grand Marshal for tyres. Now, I understand why ETK has done this actually. When you think about it, it makes sense that they've probably given this car less grip on purpose, so the faster ETKs can be, well, faster ETKs, and we can charge a premium for them. But I seriously feel this engine and this driveline, if they had properly good tyres and properly good brakes and aero, this could be an absolute monster, and it could beat up cars with more power, like it's already doing with the Grand Marshal. The chassis is here and the suspension is too. It's very firm, but it's a sports car, so that's forgivable. And yeah, it's a convertible because the convertible is cheaper than the hardtop. Don't ask me why a manual convertible is the cheapest in this case, it just is. Maybe no one wants a 4-cylinder convertible because it's all show and no go. Anyway, it's impressive, you know, this car impressed me. Just, if only it had more grip, if only it had a better differential, it's one of those things. It could be so much better than it is without any really major chassis changes or suspension changes. But it's one of those, it's being held back for the greater good cases. And there we go. Over the massive bumps on the side of a track. And yeah, it's not the easiest vehicle to control, especially if you floor it out of corners, but the chassis is brilliant. We've had these convertibles on before, they feel like hard tops, they're that good. Even when you throw so much power through the wheels, they just don't give up. You see here, I'm getting another slide though, again the tyres just aren't here. If it was like the Cadillac though, that's my point specifically, even if you were to only change the tyres, the rest of the car is so good. Just not the tyres. And that's a disappointment, you know. We have things like the Ibishu Dove that will never be a performance car, and we have this that will never be a performance car because ETK don't want it to be. You'll see as we go over the end, very, very firm there. The interior is quite dark, you know. That's why I appreciate the convertible ETKs. They actually let a lot more light into the interior of a very dark car and brighten everything up, really. and yeah, natural black colour scheme on every modern ETK. But that's all I've got to speak about today. So goodbye, until another day.